October 18, 1955, the lifeless bodies of 3 young boys were discovered unclothed in a drainage ditch. These boys were Robert Peterson, aged 14, John Schuessler, aged 13, and Anton Schuessler, aged 11. This tragic event had a profound and lasting impact on the community. The relentless pursuit of justice was met with frustration as the case remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. The question lingered. Who could have committed such a horrific crime against these innocent boys? How were they able to elude justice for such an extended period of time? Let us transport ourselves back to the 1950s and explore the hidden gem of Chicago's northwest side. Norwood Park and Jefferson Park, nestled within this district, provided solace for those seeking refuge from the chaos of urban living. The close-knit community revolved around its parish, Little League, and bowling alleys. With the lowest crime rate in the city, it was an idyllic place to raise a family until tragedy struck in 1955. On February 11, 1942, in Cook County, Chicago, Malcolm and Dorothy Peterson joyfully welcomed their firstborn, Robert, affectionately known as Bobby. Robert was the eldest of 4 siblings, with younger sisters Barbara Ann, aged 7, and Susan, aged 5, as well as a 3-year-old brother named Tommy. Even as a child, Robert was recognized for his tidiness and meticulousness, ensuring his room was always immaculate. He was a responsible young man who not only assisted at home, but also actively participated in various community endeavors. John Schuessler, born on November 30th, 1941, to Anton John Schuessler Sr. and Eleanor Lillian Holtz Schuessler, possessed a deep passion for sports from a tender age. He was an exceptional and well-behaved child who steered clear of trouble. 2 years later, on November 12th, 1943, his brother Anton John Schuessler, affectionately known as Tony, entered the world. Tony harbored a lifelong aspiration to become a veterinarian, a dream he nurtured from his earliest years. The bond between the 2 brothers was unbreakable, engaging in shared activities and maintaining a close circle of friends. As the sun descended upon the serene streets where John, Anton, and Robert had spent their childhood engaging in sports and exploring their surroundings, an ominous feeling of something sinister and dark permeated the atmosphere. A dreadful event was on the horizon. It was the 16th of October, 1955, a crisp autumn day in Chicago. The 2 young brothers, 13-year-old John and 11-year-old Anton, mounted their bicycles and pedaled their way to their friend Robert's house. Having already assisted their unwell father in hanging a clothesline in the basement, they now had the entire day to themselves. With a burning desire to embark on a daring escapade, John and Anton each possessed $1.25 in cash, eagerly awaiting their plan to secretly venture downtown and catch a movie. This audacious and forbidden adventure was made possible by their 14-year-old friend, Robert, who possessed the necessary expertise and permission to join them. Robert's mother, Dorothy, even aided them in selecting a film, Disney's The African Lion, which they intended to watch at the Loop Theater. Armed with $1.50 in his hand, Robert bid farewell to his parents, adhering to their customary routine of affectionate kisses, and departed from the house with the promise of returning home by 8 p.m. As the night grew darker and the clock struck past 8, panic began to consume both families. There was no trace of the boys, nor were there any phone calls. Eleanor, the mother of John and Anton, made a phone call to the Peterson residence to inquire about the whereabouts of the boys. To Eleanor's astonishment, Dorothy, Robert's mother, revealed that they had set off for downtown, leaving her in a state of shock. The fear intensified when there was no communication from the boys, prompting Dorothy Peterson to contact the police at the Gale Street station around 10 p.m. She conversed with a sergeant who advised the families to reach out to the police again if the boys failed to return within an hour. The sky, which had initially been adorned with a beautiful blue hue when the boys embarked on their adventure, gradually transformed as the day progressed. The stormy night brought forth torrential rainfall, further exacerbating the anxiety that had gripped the neighborhood. In spite of the challenging circumstances, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Schuessler were determined not to give up their search for their missing sons. They meticulously combed through every hamburger establishment along Milwaukee Avenue and even thoroughly checked the Loop Theater, where the boys had intended to watch a movie. However, all their efforts proved fruitless. It seemed as though the boys had vanished without a trace, leaving no option but to involve the police. Despite their children attending the same school and being friends, the Peterson and Schuessler families had never crossed paths or engaged in conversation with one another. It was as if their lives were running parallel, never intersecting. Little did they know that their lives were on the verge of becoming intricately intertwined in a way they could never have anticipated. As the police initiated their search for the missing boys, they inquired about the boys' attire and belongings, hoping to gather any potential clues. They discovered that Robert had been wearing a distinct White Sox jacket, while the other boys were clad in Cubs jackets. But where could they be? The downtown area was several hours away by car, making it unlikely for them to have traveled that far. Perhaps they had spent their money on snacks and were walking back home in the pouring rain. Or maybe they had gone bowling, a favored pastime of the boys. The search persisted as various theories and ideas were discussed, yet the only certainty was the mounting worry of the families involved. As the sun rose on October 17, 1955, the day following the boys' disappearance, the sense of unease within the community intensified. The police were equally perplexed, as they had never encountered a case in that community where a missing child had not been found. Although Robert had skipped school on a few occasions in the past, everyone knew he was responsible and would never abandon Anton and John on their own. The detectives made the decision to visit Farnsworth School on Linder Avenue, where the boys were enrolled in order to determine if the disappearance had any connection to the school. Principal D.W. Thornton recommended exploring the North Branch of the Chicago River in the Forest Preserve due to its history of violent incidents. A year earlier, a high school boy had assaulted a grade school student near the river. The teachers, Mrs. Bernice Jonas and Miss Cecilia Schwachten, were deeply upset and tried to remain composed. Mrs. Jonas speculated that one or two individuals may have been attempting to gain the students' attention in recent days, as reported by some students. The community was gripped with fear, and the detectives understood that if they didn't locate the boys soon, rumors and speculation would cloud the truth. The detectives faced a challenging task ahead. With a population of 60,000 in the area, they had numerous doorbells to ring and a vast region to cover. They recognized the need to narrow down the search locations to improve their chances of success. Consequently, they began by investigating the Loop Theater and reaching out to the bus drivers who were on duty on the day the boys went missing. One driver, Bruno Malcarini, provided a crucial lead. He recalled seeing 3 boys matching the description of Robert, John, and Anton boarding his bus at Berthoud Avenue, displaying their student ID cards. He dropped them off at Lawrence Avenue, where they intended to go to the Jefferson Park recreation alleys for bowling. The issue arose when they didn't request a transfer slip, indicating that they were supposed to disembark at Central near the Peterson home. Perhaps this innocent change of plans triggered a horrifying sequence of events. It appeared that the detectives were finally making progress in their search for the missing boys. Sightings at the bowling alley yielded the next significant lead. Neighbors and relatives confirmed seeing Robert and Anton at Monte Cristo Bowling Alley, where they took a restroom break while John conversed with a neighbor. The boys departed at 8 p.m. after Robert and Anton returned from the restroom. Edward C. Davis, the manager of the alley, provided additional details, shedding light on the boys' activities that day. According to Davis, they had visited the alley twice, once at approximately 3:15 p.m. and again at 7 p.m. However, they were unable to bowl due to their lack of funds. This raised a perplexing question. Why would the boys return to the same location where they had been turned away earlier without any money to participate in the activity? While the detectives now had a timeline to work with, there were still gaps in their understanding of the events. It was frustrating for them to be so close to the boys, yet unable to locate them. The atmosphere in the office of Captain Russell Corcoran, head of the 33rd Precinct of the Chicago Police Department, was tense and somber on that fateful day of October 18, 1955. The disappearance of the Peterson and Schussler boys had consumed the entire department, and Captain Corcoran had just reassured the commissioner that they were exerting every effort to locate them. However, at 1:15 p.m., the phone rang once again, and as the captain listened, his face turned pale and tears welled up in his eyes. After hanging up, he made a grim announcement that would forever haunt the team of detectives. The bodies of 3 young boys had been discovered, unclothed. On that day, Victor Livingston, a middle-aged liquor salesman, was leisurely driving around in his car, enjoying the rewards of his hard work. Having earned a decent sum of money, he sought a peaceful spot to have his lunch. Consequently, he decided to visit Robinson Woods Forest Preserve, a picturesque area renowned for birdwatching and autumn foliage on the northwest side of Chicago. Little did he know that he was about to stumble upon something horrifying. As he sat in his car preparing to eat, his attention was drawn to a lifeless body lying on the ground. Alarmed, he swiftly drove away in search of a phone to alert the authorities. Various authorities arrived at the scene as the news spread. When Victor approached the officers inquiring about the body, he was informed that 3 bodies had been found. Due to the bodies being placed in a shallow ditch, only one was visible. Despite the detectives' extensive search for the missing boys, the grim reality they uncovered was beyond anyone's worst nightmares. Just a fortnight before Halloween, the boys were found unclothed and stacked on top of each other, with Robert's head displaying a gruesome wound that had already healed. The contaminated area offered no hope of finding footprints or any other valuable evidence. The devastating news impacted everyone profoundly. Although detectives were expected to maintain a professional demeanor, tears flowed freely that day as they grieved the loss of the innocent children. Left with minimal evidence, the detectives noted the absence of footprints near the bodies, suggesting that the boys had been disposed of from a vehicle. The perpetrator had meticulously covered their tracks, erasing any traces of the boys' belongings or incriminating evidence. Furthermore, the presence of grease on their hands, backs, and soles indicated that the boys were likely killed elsewhere before being dumped in the forest. The absence of blood due to rain further supported this theory. An autopsy on the 3 boys revealed that they had been deceased for approximately 36 to 40 hours before their discovery in the Robinson Woods Forest Preserve. While initial suspicions pointed towards assault, the autopsy results disproved this assumption. Dr. Harry R. Hoffman, an associate of the Cook County Behavior Clinic, somberly pointed out that the individual behind such a despicable act was likely fulfilling their dark desires through the very act itself. Dr. Jerry Kearns was a seasoned professional in the field of examining human remains. He made sure not to let the weight of his work affect his personal life, but the case of the Schussler-Peterson boys would leave an indelible mark. Anton Jr. had been struck in the neck with a force akin to a karate chop, yet the presence of fingernail marks on Anton and John's necks indicated that they were strangled. The Schussler boys seemed to have been strangled using bare hands, while Robert had evidently been strangled with a rope. Additionally, he had been brutally beaten on the head 14 times with a rake or similar gardening tool, and the other boys had been struck on their faces with what seemed to be the flat side of a knife. Coroner Walter E. McCarrow also shared his thoughts on the tragedy, labeling it as the work of a deranged individual or possibly a group of older boys. It was observed that Robert, John, and Anton were likely held captive in unsanitary conditions, bound and silenced with adhesive tape before being discarded in the forest preserve. Dr. Kearns was well aware that this was no ordinary crime. He asserted that it was not carried out by individuals of the same age group, nor was it the work of a lone 18 or 20-year-old. The assailant had approached from the left rear, and despite the gruesome nature of the crime, there was no sign of sexual assault. Robert had put up a fierce fight for his life, evident from the head injuries he sustained. The recovery of the boys' bodies marked just the beginning of the nightmare. Witnesses came forward to report seeing a vehicle pick up the three boys. One witness even claimed the car was a Packard, leading to the interrogation of nearly 1,000 Packard owners. Despite an exhaustive investigation that involved interviewing over 43,000 individuals, the perpetrator remained at large. Anton Schuessler Sr., who had lost his two sons, expressed his thoughts on the tragic events, stating, "When children can't safely go to the movies in the afternoon and return home, there is something fundamentally wrong with the country." However, the tragedy did not end there for the Schuessler family. Anton Sr., at only 41 years old, passed away due to a heart attack just a month after the murders. Eleanor Schuessler's life became even more isolated as she mourned the loss of both her sons and her husband. Despite eventually marrying Valentine Bud Kujawa and attempting to move forward, the memories of the murders continued to haunt her. She kept a photo of her boys and a bronzed baby shoe of each on her dresser as a constant reminder of the children she had lost. For years, she grappled with the unanswered question of what had happened to her sons, with occasional visits from investigators serving as painful reminders of the unsolved case. Gary Kujawa, her stepson, recalled the profound impact the murders had on her, noting that she was always haunted by the tragedy. The Peterson family also struggled to come to terms with their loss. Malcolm, Robert's father, not only mourned the loss of his son, but also his closest companion. Dorothy, Robert's mother, was left so devastated by the tragedy that she required medical attention. In the aftermath of the murders, Chicago became a place of unease. Law enforcement officers scoured the streets tirelessly, searching for any evidence or clues related to the case. Parents were reluctant to let their children out of their sight, fearing they could also become victims of the unknown perpetrators. Leaving children home alone was no longer an option, as doors were securely locked, and even disposing of items in the trash seemed risky, as any suspicious activity could lead to intense questioning by investigators. The community was gripped by fear, with terror infiltrating every aspect of daily life. Despite the disorder, the investigation continued with the presence of numerous uniformed police officers and undercover detectives scouring the neighborhood. Captain Louis Caparelli enlisted an additional 200 officers from his unit, all of whom willingly sacrificed their weekend to aid in the manhunt. It was an unprecedented display of unity within the Chicago Police Department, with one officer commenting, "I've never witnessed anything like it." However, it wasn't until December 7th, 1955, that the Chicago Daily News took notice of peculiar markings discovered on John's left thigh, positioned between his knee and hip. These oval-shaped markings, measuring 4 inches by 2 inches, featured a pattern of stars and letters imprinted on the fatty tissue beneath the skin. Of particular significance was the word bear. Dr. Kearns had overlooked this detail in his initial findings. Yet, there were other crucial oversights as well. Funeral home attendants had uncovered alarming bone fractures in the Schuessler brothers, which Dr. Kearns had failed to detect. Additionally, adhesive tape had covered the boys' faces, but it had been removed prior to their bodies being left in the ditch. The perpetrators of this crime were well aware of what they were doing, concluded Coroner McCarran. They took care to eliminate the tape used for blindfolding and gagging the victims, as it could have revealed fingerprints. The leads that once appeared promising gradually dwindled, transforming the once bustling investigation into a silent and stagnant cold case. The brutal murders of 3 young boys in Chicago left investigators with more questions than answers. As if the case wasn't perplexing enough, over a year later, on December 28, 1956, 2 teenage girls, 15-year-old Barbara Grimes and 13-year-old Patricia Grimes, vanished after watching their beloved movie, Love Me Tender. Their lifeless bodies were discovered unclothed on the side of the road, mirroring the earlier murders. However, unlike the boys, there was no clear cause of death. The coroner's jury ruled that the sisters froze to death, but the chief investigator, Harry G. Ellows, disagreed. He believed that the ice around the bodies showed that they were warm when they were left there, and that the puncture wounds in Patricia's chest were signs of violence before death. He also suspected that Barbara had been assaulted, which the pathologists had denied. The eerie similarities between the two cases led to speculation that the same person might have been responsible for both. After decades of frustration and dead ends, it seemed like the case of the murdered boys in Chicago would remain a mystery forever. But then, in 1994, a bombshell dropped, and it wasn't the kind of evidence you see in TV crime dramas. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no trace evidence examined by a forensics expert. Instead, it was a seemingly innocent comment made by a snitch in a completely unrelated investigation that suddenly opened up a direct path to a suspect in this long-dormant investigation. During an investigation into suspected horse killings and the mysterious disappearance of candy heiress and horsewoman Helen Voorhees Brach on February 17, 1977, a breakthrough occurred when Special Agent Jim Grady and his partner, Mr. Rotuno, began piecing together clues from the horse racing industry. They knew they were entering a world of secrets. As the pieces started to fall into place, the prosecution team found themselves delving into an underworld of murderers, arsonists, swindlers, con men, and even a group known as the Horse Mafia. As they dug deeper, they started hearing whispers about a man named Kenneth Hansen in relation to the boys' slayings, who had bragged about the incident to the people he was close with. For years, the case was built from fragments of information called from this murky world. But somehow, they managed to make it all fit together, painting a vivid picture of what had happened all those years ago. In the early 1990s, detectives were closing in on Kenneth Hansen, who had a rather eventful life. Born to Ethan and Lucille Hansen in 1933, Kenneth was known for his intelligence and charisma during his childhood. He later married his high school sweetheart, Beverly Ray Carlson, and together they had 2 sons, Danny and Mark. In the 1960s, Kenneth opened and managed a riding stable called Camelot near Tinley Park. It was during this time that Roger Spry, a young worker at the stable, became a part of the Hansen family, residing in their house from a young age. However, things took a dark turn when Hansen made inappropriate advances towards Spry and banished him to sleep with the dogs in the kennels. Eventually, when Spry was still a child, Hansen initiated a relationship with him that lasted for years until Spry turned 18. Throughout this period, Spry lived on and off with Hansen, while Hansen also picked up male hitchhikers aged between 11 and 16 years old, offering them lodging at the stables in exchange for work. Hansen would often boast to Spry about his relations with these young boys. As the summer of 1994 approached, Hansen began to feel the weight of impending doom as the investigation into his possible involvement in a decades-old case closed in on him. He became so paranoid that he started asking his neighbor if there were any police officers looking around his house. Meanwhile, the investigations surrounding the disappearance of Helen Voorhees Brach continued to unfold, adding more intrigue to the situation. In July 1994, the police made a significant move by charging Richard Bailey, a former stable owner and acquaintance of Hansen's, with soliciting Brach's murder. But that was not the end of it. Authorities also charged 23 other individuals for their alleged participation in schemes to kill valuable horses for insurance payments. On August 11, 1994, Kenneth Hansen was apprehended by the Chicago Police and Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms at his residence in Country Club Hills, where he was found with a packed suitcase. The arrest was in connection to an arson incident in 1972 that destroyed the Forest View Stables, a rival business, and resulted in the deaths of 36 horses. The following day, on August 12th, Hansen was formally charged with 3 counts of murder in the Peterson-Schuessler case. At the time of the murders, he was 22 years old, and he was 61 years old at the time of his arrest. The announcement of the murder charges against Hansen raised questions about the evidence authorities had against him. Despite not revealing specific evidence, Cook County State's Attorney Jack O'Malley stressed that after 4 decades, the case could not rely solely on physical evidence. This lack of transparency deepened the mystery surrounding the case, leaving many curious about how the prosecution planned to build their case against Hansen. Although Robert Hansen was one of the 43,000 individuals initially interviewed, there is no indication that he was aware of being a suspect or deliberately concealed his involvement from investigators. Police reports suggest that on October 16, 1955, Robert, John, and Anton were hitchhiking on Milwaukee Avenue when they were picked up by Hansen, who resided just a few blocks away from where he encountered the boys. Hansen then transported them to Idle Hour Stables, a location he frequented and worked at on the city's northwest side. According to sources, Hansen attempted to engage in inappropriate behavior with the boys, and when they resisted, the situation turned violent, resulting in the boys' deaths. On that same evening, witness Hetty Salerno heard 2 chilling screams emanating from the direction of the Idle Hour stable while she was going about her activities. Spry, who resided with Hansen's family, testified that Hansen once recounted a chilling incident involving 3 boys he had picked up while they were hitchhiking. According to Hansen's version of events, he took them to a barn where he assaulted Anton. When John, Robert, and Anton threatened to report the incident to their parents and the police, an argument ensued. The defendant ended up accidentally strangling one of the boys in the heat of the moment and was then compelled to eliminate the other 2 to prevent being exposed. After the killings, Hansen's friends showed up, and together they disposed of the bodies in the nearby forest preserves with the help of an employee. Hansen had openly admitted to multiple individuals about the murders, even mentioning how his brother, Curtis Hansen, had attacked one of the boys with a blunt object. Kenneth Hansen lived in constant fear that Curtis might disclose his secrets at any moment. Witnesses during the initial trial testified that Hansen had confessed to them about the killings in a room at the Idle Hour stable. The stable was under the ownership of Silas Jamie, a controversial figure in the horsebreeding world known for his erratic behavior and suspected involvement in violent and shady dealings. Despite this, he managed to climb the ranks in the industry, becoming a prominent figure in the Chicago horse scene. It was believed that Silas somehow learned about the 3 boys being killed in the stable and was outraged. Some witnesses even claimed that he assisted in disposing of the bodies. Hansen bragged that after the bodies were discovered, he relocated to South Chicago and arranged for the Idle Hour stable to be burned down to eliminate any evidence. In 1995, Hansen was found guilty of the atrocious crime, but his fortunes changed when the Illinois Appellate Court overturned his conviction 5 years later. It was determined that the jury should not have been exposed to Hansen's history of inappropriate behavior with boys. Nevertheless, justice prevailed during a retrial in 2002. The jury quickly reached a guilty verdict, leading to Hansen being sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated. Despite appealing the decision in 2004, it was upheld. Kenneth Hansen battled dementia in prison and passed away on September 13, 2007, at the age of 74. The news of his conviction evoked a range of emotions, from relief to anger. One individual deeply impacted was a stepbrother of the Schuessler brothers, whose pain resurfaced upon learning of Hansen's death. Leonard Goodman, Hansen's former attorney, maintained his client's innocence, believing that an earlier arrest could have provided a solid alibi. However, with decades past, recalling specific details from 1955 was impossible. Prosecutors and investigators argued that the evidence against Hansen was strong, labeling the case as a deadlock. They also alleged that Hansen had victimized numerous boys leading up to his arrest. The Peterson-Schuessler murder case transcended a mere crime, becoming a chilling tale that instilled fear and unease throughout the city. Once a peaceful community, it transformed into a place where darkness was dreaded and the unknown was feared.
Our narrative unfolds in the quaint village of Cullen, Michigan, a rural haven with a mere 1,200 residents. On May 10, 1985, a telephone technician embarked on his daily routine, inspecting poles and phone lines. His attention was drawn to a peculiar sight on the ground, a dark, damp patch. Curiosity piqued, he bent down for a closer examination. Beneath the Earth's surface, what appeared to be blue jeans caught his eye. A swarm of flies hovered above, and he distinguished the gruesome outline of decaying flesh. Without hesitation, the technician hastened to his work truck, drove to the nearest telephone, and alerted law enforcement. Detective Sergeant Robin Baker of the St. Joseph County Sheriff's Office promptly arrived at the scene. Upon inspection, Baker observed a belt and human skin exposed in the shallow grave. Initially, the only discernible fact was the body's prone position. To ensure a meticulous investigation, crime scene technicians were summoned to initiate the exhumation process. This painstaking task spanned hours, as the team scrupulously combed through the dirt in search of crucial evidence. Ultimately, they unearthed the remains of a Caucasian female, whose advanced decomposition necessitated alternative identification methods. The clothing found on the deceased matched a missing persons report filed 8 weeks earlier in another part of the county. With no other missing persons cases at the time, investigators strongly believed the victim was the woman reported missing from Three Rivers, Michigan. Three Rivers, a charming town nestled at the confluence of the Portage, Rocky, and St. Joseph rivers, boasted a close-knit community of approximately 8,000 residents. It was here that Bruce Van Buskirk, a Three Rivers police officer, met and married Linda Jacobs, a devoted Christian woman. The couple had 2 daughters, but their marriage eventually faltered due to infidelity, culminating in a contentious divorce. Now a single mother, Linda relied on her parents' support to care for her girls. As she rebuilt her life, Linda rented a house on Day Road in a rural area of Three Rivers, seeking a fresh start. Linda Jacobs crossed paths with Jim Briney at their local church, where he came to know her as a resilient, intelligent, and self-sufficient individual. Recognizing her struggles, Jim generously offered his home as temporary accommodation, frequently staying with Linda's parents, Paul and Evelyn, when he was in town. Grateful, Linda accepted Jim's offer and moved in with her daughters. To make ends meet, she resourcefully started a lemonade stand and baked goods business from home. Whenever time allowed, Linda would often take solace in walking the nearby trails. On March 26, 1985, with her parents watching the children, Linda embarked on one of such walk, enjoying the pleasant 70-degree weather. However, as sunset approached, Linda failed to return and collect her children, a stark departure from her devoted motherly nature. Alarmed, Paul and Evelyn Jacobs reached out to friends, neighbors, and eventually the authorities, fearing the worst. Linda's impeccable reputation preceded her, a law-abiding citizen, teetotaler, and devoted church member. Her parents provided detectives with a detailed description of her attire and a photograph. The next morning, an extensive search operation commenced, covering the rural area where Linda typically walked. The road, devoid of streetlights, wound through forests and farmland, with scattered homes. Neighbors reported seeing Linda pass by, but their accounts yielded no significant leads. Investigators then interviewed a resident near the Day and Mount Zion Road intersection, approximately 1.5 miles from Linda's residence. The man revealed that his son, Todd, had heard gunshots the previous day. Curious, the boy had walked up a nearby hill and observed a car at the intersection. He witnessed a man loading what appeared to be a deer into the trunk. Notably, the boy's school bus passed through the area around 3:30 p.m., coinciding with Linda's walking schedule. Investigations took Todd's account seriously, recognizing its potential connection to Linda's disappearance. Detectives aimed to glean more information from the 10-year-old, hoping his recollection might crack the case. Todd recounted his experience from approximately 300 yards away. "I heard gunshots," he began. Guiding him through the events, detectives asked, "You went to the top of the hill by the tree, right?" Todd affirmed, "Yes." "Did you see anybody?" They pressed. "Yeah," Todd replied, describing a man beside a dark hatchback. "You thought it was a deer?" investigators clarified. Todd confirmed, "Yes." The detectives requested Todd lead them to the exact spot where he witnessed the vehicle and the presumed deer. Upon inspection, detectives confirmed Linda's walking route would have intersected this location. Approximately 15 feet from the road's edge, they discovered a sizable bloodstain, 12 to 15 inches in diameter. Uncertain whether the blood was human or animal, investigators collected samples for testing. Nearby, they discovered a spent shell casing from a hollow-point bullet, a type commonly used by police officers but less so among civilians. The shell casing validated Todd's account, intensifying the search. A county-wide alert was issued for the dark hatchback, shared among Three Rivers and Michigan State Police. Officers stopped matching vehicles, inspecting trunks in hopes of finding evidence linking the hunter to Linda's disappearance. Detectives were urgent to identify the man. Todd's recollection became crucial. "I saw a man wearing glasses." To unearth more details, investigators suggested hypnosis. Todd and his parents consented. Detectives updated Linda's family on the ominous developments, alarming them. The search expanded to neighboring counties, broadening the quest for the dark hatchback. Linda's disappearance garnered widespread attention, with the public scouring the area for the elusive dark hatchback. Despite exhaustive efforts, the vehicle remained at large. Detectives explored every lead, focusing initially on Linda's ex-husband, Three Rivers police officer, Bruce Van Buskirk. The couple's contentious child custody battle and recent separation heightened suspicions. Notably, Bruce's duty ammunition matched the hollow-point casing found near the abduction site, solidifying his position as a prime suspect. As the search entered its fourth day, anxiety intensified with the crime lab's blood analysis report. The results confirmed detectives' worst fears. The blood was human. Coupled with Todd's eyewitness account and the blood quantity, investigators were now working under the assumption of a homicide investigation. The shell casings indicated a .38 or .35-7 caliber weapon. Authorities collected local officers' firearms, including Bruce's, for batch testing at the crime lab. As investigators awaited forensic results, they utilized Todd's eyewitness account to create a composite sketch. The sketch, circulated locally, failed to yield immediate identification. Although the sketch didn't resemble Officer Bruce Van Buskirk, he remained a suspect. Ballistic analysis cleared Van Buskirk's gun, but investigators acknowledged he could have used another firearm. Attention shifted to Jim Briney, Linda's landlord and close acquaintance. As a relatively new resident of Three Rivers, Jim's background was somewhat mysterious. Detectives brought Jim in for questioning, employing tough tactics to uncover potential information. Shortly thereafter, investigators verified Jim's alibi, confirming he was out of town on the day Linda vanished. 6 weeks dragged on, with no substantial leads. Investigators grew increasingly concerned that Linda's case might go cold, leaving her family and community without answers or closure. In late spring, a phone line technician stumbled upon a disturbing discovery 16 miles east of Three Rivers, on a secluded road near Cologne. The technician found a partially buried body, prompting an urgent call to authorities. Crime scene technicians swiftly arrived, exhuming the body for autopsy. The pathologist obtained Linda Van Buskirk's dental records for comparison. The forensic analysis conclusively identified the body as Linda's. The autopsy ruled out sexual assault, revealing 3 gunshot wounds to the head, shoulder, and hand. The pathologist deduced that the headshot was the final, execution-style blow. Linda's family was overcome with grief upon learning of her tragic fate. Detectives redoubled their efforts to secure justice for Linda and her loved ones. The remote burial site suggested the killer's familiarity with the area. Investigations focused on local connections, interviewing employees from nearby businesses. A gas station attendant in Cologne reported seeing Ricky Moore in town on the day Linda Van Buskirk vanished. Notably, Ricky's father, Larry Moore, was a sheriff's department sergeant, and Ricky served as a reserve deputy. Investigations revealed Ricky lived with his parents in Three Rivers, near the intersection of Linda's murder. The Moore family also owned a cabin in Cologne. Ricky submitted to multiple interviews with the sheriff's department, displaying cooperation. He claimed to have visited the Cologne cabin on the night of Linda's disappearance to investigate a potential break-in. Ricky was familiar with the location where Linda's body was discovered. Although his vehicle didn't match Todd Terrell's eyewitness description, Ricky consented to a search. Forensic tests found no blood in Ricky's vehicle, but detectives remained cautious, refusing to clear him as a suspect just yet. The interview achieved its intended purpose. Sergeant Moore arrived and Ricky accompanied him home, closely followed by investigators. At the residence, detectives demanded, "We're here for the gun." Ricky hesitated, but his father intervened. "Get upstairs and retrieve the gun." Ricky complied, taking a few minutes before returning, visibly shaken, pale and sweating. He handed over the gun, which was promptly sent to the crime lab. With Sergeant Moore's consent, investigators searched Ricky's bedroom, uncovering hollow-point bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The firearms expert noted damage to the gun's barrel, rendering it untestable for ballistic matching to the crime scene evidence. The expert explained the likely cause of the damage. This development raised suspicions, implying potential tampering. Despite the damaged gun, investigators remained focused on Ricky Moore, considering the cumulative evidence, his presence in Colon, familiarity with the crime scene location, and now, the compromised firearm. Pursuing further evidence, investigators arranged a lineup for Todd Terrell to identify the suspect. Viewing through one-way glass, Todd failed to recognize the man from the intersection. The composite sketch, crafted from Todd's description, bore no resemblance to Ricky Moore. Given Todd's 200-yard distance from the crime, his inability to identify the perpetrator wasn't surprising. Meanwhile, the ballistics expert persevered, clearing Ricky's firearm to facilitate comparison. The expert then contacted the investigator saying he has made a match. The bullet fragments and shell casings from the crime scene originated from Ricky's gun. This conclusive evidence warranted charges against Ricky Moore for Linda Van Buskirk's murder. At Ricky's residence, the detective handcuffed him, marking a pivotal moment in the investigation. Despite the damning evidence, Ricky maintained his innocence. Ricky's parents, convinced of his innocence, hired a lawyer to defend him. Ricky submitted to a polygraph test, which indicated deception when he denied killing Linda. The polygraph examiner expressed puzzlement, asking, "Why did you do it?" Ricky requested to see his father and attorney outside the room. Detectives heard anguished wailing. Ricky confessed to his father and lawyer, screaming, "I'm so sorry!" Although motive remained unclear, investigators speculated a sexually motivated attack, given Ricky's described loner status. Detectives linked Ricky's infatuation with Linda to his purchase of a car from Bruce Van Buskirk. Apparently, Ricky stalked Linda before making a fatal, rebuffed sexual advance on March 26, 1985. This rejection triggered Linda's brutal murder. Ricky Moore opted for a bench trial, waiving his right to a jury. The courtroom atmosphere was tense as Ricky pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Prosecutors presented compelling evidence, including Ricky's attempts to damage the gun and bury Linda's body, demonstrating his awareness of wrongdoing. On May 13, 1986, Judge Corsilia delivered his verdict. Ricky Lawrence Moore was guilty of first-degree murder. Convinced beyond reasonable doubt, the judge determined Ricky's actions were premeditated. In Michigan, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence, life without parole. Jim Briney, who had taken Linda in, remembered her kindness and beauty. Ricky Moore currently serves his life sentence at Muskegon Correctional Facility in Muskegon, Michigan. Justice was served, bringing closure to Linda's family and community while honoring her memory.